Welcome to another Pint with Seaniebee, all the way again from New York, with a good pal of mine who I have down as probably my greatest hire, would you believe? Even though he can be a cranky fucker from time to time. He's also from my hometown. We grew up, we didn't know each other in Dublin, but we grew up probably 4 or 5 miles away from each other.
Yeah.
So, very pleased to welcome to the podcast my good friend Gordon McLean. How are you?
How are you, Shawnee?
Have you been on a podcast before?
No, I haven't actually.
Right.
I don't think I've ever been interviewed.
You haven't been interviewed before?
I don't think so, no.
Oh, well, this is a first. So this is basically two guys. We first met each other in J. Walter Thompson in New York in about 2008, I'd say. And then Gordy went off on his travels. He's married to a lovely Turkish lady called Ekin, and they went to Turkey, so we'll hear all about that. And then I brought him back to New York to work with me and BBDO. And I got slung out of there, but he's still here 6 years later and powering up the ladder. So where in Dublin are you from?
Tala, Old Bawn Drive.
Old Bawn Drive.
Really specific.
Only known to me really for Sunday football matches where we used to trek all the way out
the field
there.
across the way.
Yeah, I used to play like under 12s out there and get beaten usually. What was it like for our listeners growing up in Tala?
It was one of those places that everybody knew. Tala had a reputation. If you got your car stolen, that's where you'd find it. But
horses running down.
Horses, yeah, that kind of came a little bit later, the horse thing. It was a few fashionable magazines did some like black and white beautiful editorials of horses in Ballymun Elevate, stuff like that. But these
would be usually travelling people, I guess. I've got to watch out what we call them. But, Shire horses that would have been used to pull carts, and they often escape and go galloping down the Duke.
You saw a bit of that up in West Tala as well. I was actually born in a place called Springfield, which is what is called West Tala now. So if anybody knows that, it's kind of beyond the square, I suppose. And then when I was about 10, I moved to another part. And I suppose there was some comfort in growing up in a place like that. You would often hear about New York, which is funny now, living in New York, because New York is so gentrified and such a safe, nice, interesting place to live. But back then, New York was a more dangerous place than Tala, so that was some relief. If I was to boil my life down into 2 or 3 sort of lessons, one of them at least is the benefit of failure. And when I was not a very average kid academically, put it down to just having no direction, I just couldn't see the purpose of it. I've realised subsequently that I need a goal, I need some kind of specific ambition in order to sort of devise a strategy. And if I'd had some driving goal at the time that would have made sense of education, I probably would have had a more strategic approach, says the planner, to my education. And I didn't have the goal, so therefore I sort of just spent most of my education tuned out.
I would actually agree with that about you, because even the times we've worked together, you do get cranky if you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, or you don't understand where that is. Yeah. But if you have it, you just roll up the sleeves and get stuck in. I was the same in school. I call myself a straight C student,
right?
Which is basically what I got in my leaving.
That would describe me. And I can still really remember that time. We finished school, burnt my school tie in June. Set fire to it in the back garden. It was kind of a ceremonial saying goodbye to school. And I really couldn't stand school. I couldn't stand school from the first day, actually, that I went to primary school, but all the way through to the end, which for some people is a great shame. For me, it seemed like there was no other option.
Yeah. So
we enjoyed the summer, beers in the park, friends, living it up, freedom at last. And then September, October came around, and I'll never forget it. Like, many people went off and got jobs, but a few people went off to college. I didn't even realise they were going to college. It was suddenly, was the plans of other people made themselves known by the time the dust of the sort of summer dust had settled.
But was your school not trying to push you into that?
No.
Why would they think of something so harebrained as that?
Yeah, it remained it was a bit of a mystery to me then afterwards, going, what meeting did I miss? And now, look, I'm not sort of passing off my responsibilities. I mean, clearly I chose to miss that meeting, but somehow it was a revelation to me that other people had plans.
But wait, had you applied for college?
No.
But there's every school year, and the whole thing is get your leaving and then apply.
Not for me. And I either I blanked that out in my mind,
right,
that I opted out of it consciously, or
so
I
what
just
did
wasn't
you
included.
think was going to happen when you left school?
I figured I'd get a job of some sort,
right,
and it was as vague as that. And so my dad, who had run his own business for about, I'd say 10 years or so.
Doing what?
He was an electrician, and he
Right.
then set up after he went out on his own, and he was selling, sort of automation equipment and so on to, large companies that were moving into Ireland. Intel, a big plant in Leixlip, he sold a lot to them.
Okay.
One of his clients. So he took me on. Then I started to work with him. I was working as a Sparks sidekick, I suppose you could call it, Sparky sidekick.
So did you learn about being an electrician?
No, because I was doing that as a way to stay off the street, I suppose, just a job. But where some people might have thought, okay, well, this is an opportunity, I'll serve my time, get a trade.
Yeah.
It didn't do anything for me, so I was in that awkward and frustrating position for my parents where I was very dissatisfied with what I was doing, but I had no clue what the alternative would be. And that was a pretty sort of a paralysing place to be, because you could feel the frustration with parents mounting, like if you don't know where you want to go, you've got this in front of you and you don't want that either.
Did you have a lot of mates?
I had a few, and they were sort of happy to just get a job and roll, but somehow there was something in me that was dissatisfied all round with what I had, and I suppose again it was the lack of objective. I couldn't see what might be over the hill. I think when there's something inside you that says, I feel like there's something over the hill, but I can't for the life of me figure the path out through it. And I know,
was Ireland the problem?
I don't want to be here. I think I made Ireland the problem because I was so, that sense of kind of being lost. And it's easy to then blame family, country, friends, this, that, and the other, yourself. A tendency then to perhaps want to walk away. But I will say that, even though what I'm describing now sounds like it was some kind of like walk through the darkness for years, it was really swift realization come September, October. I worked through that year, and then at some point during the year I realized, okay, well, I don't really know where I'm going to go, but some kind of education would be better. I feel like I want to do better, and so that feels like a reasonable stepping stone. So I went and I did I remember at the time my mum was helping, I think the local council with some, it was a sort of a counselling role in its own right. Actually, it was helping people who had been bereaved or who had troubles at home, and she found it very interesting, and I found what she described very interesting, and because it was dealing with emotion, I was dealing with a lot of that myself at the time. It was dealing with complexity and people who were somehow lost themselves, and I found some kind of kinship in that. So at the time when it came then to choosing some kind of educational path forward, I ended up doing a 2-year national diploma in social care in Whitehall Senior College out on the Whitehall Road.
Were you in on yourself a bit back then?
How do you mean?
Like were you inside your own head without really any way of getting or talking to anyone yourself? Was that
I think it's that feeling of like you feel like there's something more, but you can't quite point to it or articulate it. I think the other interesting part or important part of the puzzle was shortly after I left school, I met a French girl who was visiting Dublin, and she was a couple of years older than me, and she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, well, I'm just starting to work with my dad, and I'll figure things out." I said, "What do you do?" And she said, "Well, I'm just starting a master's at the Sorbonne in Paris."
You're batting above your average there.
And I thought, I was definitely out of my league. So, but nevertheless, I dated that girl for a few years, and she was a huge influence on me actually. And when you start to get close to someone like that, who initially you think is completely out of your league, and you develop a bond with them, and you realize we're on the same wavelength. I can't really be in a different league. We just come from different circumstances.
Yeah.
And that was a huge lesson for me as well. I thought, okay, well, if she's capable of it, and she was likely very much, a lot smarter than I, but still I thought I'm not on the other end of the spectrum either. If she can do that, I should be really trying to aim high.
So how did that relationship run then? Was it you were over and back to Paris?
Yeah, it was a long distance thing, and I would take a few weeks off and I'd go over, and I was only 18, she was 20, and she would work in the Saint-Lazare station in Paris. She lived in the suburbs. We would travel in 45 minutes very early in the morning. She'd start her 7 a.m. shift till 2 p.m. selling tickets in the Eurostar. And while she was working, I would walk all over Paris.
Okay.
And so I know Paris pretty well, actually.
Yeah.
I hadn't much money at the time, but I had a lot of time in my hands, and it was a great, it was just a great period.
It is a great walking city.
And I always had a sort of romantic side to me, so that was a really interesting time. And then, in the meantime, then I did the 2-year national diploma. And I suppose this is, I guess, the other lesson in life is one is a more strategic lesson where having an objective helps you to form a strategy and helps you to kind of get somewhere. But then there's also, you have to leave a little bit of room for serendipity. Because I set off and I thought, you know what, I'll do this national diploma. And despite the fact that almost everybody asked me, so what are you going to do with that? You're going to be a counsellor or something? Are you going to be a sociologist? Like, I couldn't answer any of them, and it seemed almost pointless because I couldn't make a good case for it. One of the tutors, this is how ignorant I was, one of the tutors, who was a Northern Irish woman, turned to me and said, by the way, your grades are excellent, by the way. And because at that point I'd switched on and I was getting distinctions on every subject. She said, your grades are excellent. You could go to university with this. I said, really? She said, you go to university in England, because this is a British qualification, by the way. It's a BTEC. Okay. So she said, this, there are most of the universities in England will accept this as an entry qualification. So all of a sudden I suddenly, you can't see the path through the mountain.
There's a light switched on.
There's a light. You suddenly go, oh my God, this is like, that was the thing that had me sort of emigrate, if you like. Went home and said, look, I could go to university with this. And at the time, England hadn't brought in tuition fees. So, my parents were good enough to say, well, we'll support you with that and we'll pay your rent. I went off to do a degree in psychology at a university in a place called Sheffield in England. Mm-hmm. A really lovely town, warm people, very real people, and a huge number of students. There was a big college of higher education, 2 big universities, and that was, I think, the most transformative experience of my life. And I still remember getting the boat out of Dunleary, sort of waving goodbye to
the whole Magdalen track, looking back at the pigeon house fading into the distance.
And
like many an emigrant before.
It was very. It was a really poignant, memorable moment, and I thought, I wonder if I'll come back here permanently. Well, I figured I'd come back, but I wondered if I'd ever come back for good. And but I met the most amazing people. I met my friends for life there, like the friends that you call brothers. What was interesting about Sheffield was I walked out of a very unhappy place that easy to point at Ireland, but really sat with myself and in my own head. Yeah. And with a change of environment and a complete step change in terms of all of a sudden I was going to university. Yeah. Everything changed and a fresh start, and no one cares where you're from or whether you fucked up your leaving cert or you just start again. And at that point it was interesting to be Irish as well. 1996, accent took you a long way. Still does. Absolutely amazing. It was freedom, but freedom with purpose.
And then you got this university degree then in what?
In psychology. So that it's probably a good thing to have a degree, but there's a bit of dissuasion on either side of you when people are kind of like pointing at you going, that sounds like a load of bollocks. The age thing at the time, you're thinking, should I be working at this point? I'm 21 or 22. And then I was 24 by the time I finished my degree. So then this is again another bit of serendipity falls is handed to me. I am starting to freak out when I'm in my third, coming towards my finals. What am I going to do? I realise now when you come out, even with a degree, it's really only the start. You're just you do have more advantages than others without it. I will say that. One of my tutors mentioned 2 PhD scholarships that were going that year. And I thought, I'll try for one of those. So I put a pitch together. Western Europe was getting involved militarily in a lot of humanitarian conflicts. We remember things like Bosnia. Kosovo, Bosnia, missions that were framed up in the service of humanity. And it seemed very counter to the narrative that you would hear typically around military, which is very masculine, very forceful, about domination and so on. And all of a sudden you're seeing the Western military take on what you might argue are more feminine characteristics. And so I was very interested in the role of gender and gendered identities and masculine, female identities within the Western military. I'm not sure where it would have gone.
A bit like the guy who became a woman, Bradley. No, sorry, it's a joke. But
the scholarship was in education. It was right. It was 3 years paid for, and it was a research scholarship, and I had the freedom to choose my thesis. But even then, when I was doing the PhD, there was still so what are you going to do with that? So again, the constant theme of like, you know, why, and yet I don't have a great answer for these things other than this just feels like I'm better off doing this than not.
Yeah.
But there's still a certain kind of baggage around you going like, would you not cop on and start making some money?
Yeah.
So eventually, I have to be honest, that kind of got the better of me. And I realised, okay, if I see this PhD through, do I want to be an academic? And at some point, you know, either in a fid or perhaps with more thought, I concluded, you know, I'd like to make a bit more money. Which was great, because previously I was talking about what job could I get. Now I'm thinking, what career could I choose?
Right.
And that's a real step change.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I've gone from directionless to potentially a professional. So it was really up to me then to think about the field that I wanted to work in. And you know, it's hard to explain how these things happen, but somehow in my mind I thought advertising always somehow felt a little glamorous to me. It felt certainly it felt like people made money there. It felt creative, and as it happens, having a degree in psychology actually then helps you to be the person that somehow allows companies and brands to get a handle on what their customers think. But I took the yellow pages out and I found anything that sounded vaguely advertising-y. Wrote them all a letter.
Yeah.
And said, well, could I join you for at least one day a week so I could get some work experience? And I think 3 people wrote back. One was quite abusive, and and one of them invited me for an interview. So I put my Marks and Spencer suit on, and I went in, and the guy who went on to become my first boss explained what account planning was. And it's basically a bridge between the business and the consumer and the creative product. You know, you'll operate between those 3 areas. I said, that sounds great.
Yeah.
So he offered me a job. But it had some quite big clients, one of which was HSBC.
Okay.
And HSBC then was another key moment in my life.
The Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, which merged with Midland or something.
Yeah, so in England it acquired a whole lot of banks.
Midland and then changed the name to HSBC.
That's right. And I was dating a different girl at the time in London, and I was keen to get down south.
Right.
And HSBC was building a giant headquarters in Canary Wharf, and one of my clients said to me, look, we're creating a communications planning department in this new headquarters. Would you join us? And I jumped at it. So all of a sudden then I went, after 2 years in my first advertising job, to join the bank down in London, and I worked in...
What was that like?
It very quickly made me realise that the agency side is where I wanted to be.
Right.
But it also opened up the subsequent opportunities. So everything is a little stepping stone, even if you can't see forward. Each one is opening the next. And what happened was they did a round of redundancies after a year, and there was a lot of older people there, and I thought, it's going to be easy for me to get another job. These people don't want to leave their jobs. I'll put my hand up and I'll take. They had to let a number of people go, and I put my hand up, I'll take it. I left, and it took me about 3 or 4 months to find another job living in London. But at some point then, after a number of Duff interviews, I get offered a job that I'm delighted to take. And 3 days after my starting day, the guy turns to me and says, there's a reason why we hired you. I said, what's that? He said, we're pitching for the HSBC business.
Ah, how Machiavellian.
Yeah, and that's where I met a mutual friend of ours, Tal Adams. And Tal was leading the pitch.
Ah.
And so Tal says to me, you'll be very useful. So we went on, and
Tal's a great friend of mine, and Gordy's a great guy, lives in Paris. I'm hoping to have him on a podcast, but he's saying he doesn't want to be on it, so hopefully he will be.
So there we were pitching for, I mean, at the time it was the largest pitch I think that had ever been. It was a $300 million global pitch.
JWT.
J. Walter Thompson, or WPP was the holding company pitch.
Yeah.
They went on, they won the business, and then I worked on the agency side on the HSBC business again.
In London. But the HSBC thing then opened another opportunity, which was to get me to America. Yeah. You did give up drinking at some point. Tell me that story.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other sort of...
When was that? Was that later, or...?
That's like a subplot in the whole
thing.
So,
but it's important. I mean,
no, it is important.
These things that we're talking about, what you've just done there, is this great sort of hindsight analysis of a life, which is, I think, really important, that people can see that and then can then pick, as you have done, the important things. But at the time, a lot of it's luck, a lot of it's what the fuck do I do?
Yeah. Well, Steve Jobs in that famous speech, that commencement speech he did
Oh, yeah.
at Stanford, says it. You can only join the dots in retrospect, and that is absolutely, of course, it's true.
Yeah.
So the drinking thing is interesting. So naturally, and I suppose that this is again me pointing at my country as a way of explaining it, but we're good at drinking, and
well, it's expected of us.
yeah, and I around the same age as everyone else, I suppose, started drinking, and I would say by the time I left Ireland, I was definitely capable of putting them back, for sure, and I enjoyed drinking. And then when you go to college, of course, university, everyone's getting stuck in. So where it starts to become more evident as a problem is then outside of that. When I started my PhD, I was outside the typical routine. I was by myself. The social thing had gone away, and it was sort of real world, but without the real world money.
Yeah.
So I was, starting to drink more then. And then when I started working, you definitely have more money in your pocket, and you're still trying to find. You're in a foreign country, and I was definitely starting to slip into some pretty heavy drinking.
How would you define that? Like every night, or?
I would say in the early part of my career, after the PhD and starting in my first agencies, that's a fairly social environment. So you would go out on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday. By the time then, fast forward a few years to, I would say, my last 2 or 3 years before I left London, then I was in a bad way. That was every night, and that was a lot every night. Yeah. And JWT had a great bar in Knightsbridge, and you would start there, and then I'd continue when I got home. Yeah. And
I think also one of the things is there is a commonality of expectation from when you're younger in Ireland to go drinking, no doubt about that. Then there's like, are you a lad? Can you knock back 8 pints and 4 Jack Daniels and Coke and still be standing? Yeah. Or are you a collapser? Or are you someone who gets angry? Or are you a good drunk? And
you've got to find your drunk.
Yeah, and then, but that's actually the effect the alcohol has on different personality types. Yeah. Like I, for example, never drink tequila because I get punchy on tequila, and I give up the booze twice a year, as you know. Yeah. So I never have to give it up because I drink an awful lot, but I kind of don't do drugs. And you're kind of you got to kind of work out your repertoire that you can actually work within, or else it will creep up on you. And we all have the gene. Yeah. I think every Irishman has the gene. Yeah. And then, where did you decide though to go knocking it on the head? Like, was there an event, or was it just a kind of I need to just pull this in a bit? Or?
Well, I think this is very interesting about drinking, insofar as people give sort of more technical or fancy terms to these things, but a functional alcoholic. There I was still young in my career, but I was earning decent money. Yeah. And I was doing really well in work. I was rising up quite quickly. I was producing great thinking, great ideas, good campaigns, and yet I was hammering it every night. And I guess that's when people talk about a functioning alcoholic. That's an example.
I guess. Yeah.
You're getting up each day with a hangover. You're going to work. By the time the lunchtime comes around, you've perhaps shaken it off, and then you're only a few hours before you're adding it back on again. And that was getting out of control. And that was a Monday through Thursday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you'd be really putting the foot on the gas. Yeah. And then near the end, I wasn't seeing anybody. My perfect night would be starting at 5, going through till 3 by myself.
Wow.
Yeah, and
what? So tell me about that, because you talk about the little signs. You go, he's drinking alone. But I always have found you a very introspective kind of guy. I mean, I think you read a lot, and you're very happy sleuthing on things and going through.
I like my own company.
Yeah. So when you were sitting on your own, did you know the barman? Did you go to the same pub and just sit there? Did you read?
I drink at home.
You drink at home. But did you watch movies, read, or was that your night in, or was there something else you were doing except drinking, or was it just drinking?
It was largely drinking.
Okay. So then, what was the trigger then in your head that sort of got you to go, right, this has to stop, or was there one?
The two very close friends of mine that I had met in college. I met many good friends in college, but there's 2 that I still consider brothers, and a guy called Nigel, a guy called Mark. at the time Nigel lived in Germany, Mark lived in the UK, and Nigel had a house in France.
Right.
And it had turned into a thing where we would show up, maybe spend New Year's in France.
Right.
It was about an hour outside Limoges, and I turned up for the New Year's 2005. And by the time I arrived 3 days before, I mean, it was obvious I was not in a good shape. Drinking too much, just even at the first dinner when we were together.
Yeah.
And then by the time we get to New
Dessert,
Year's...
you're saying. I don't like any of you.
Well,
did you get cranky? Or
a little
what?
cranky, it gets a bit dark.
Yeah.
No, never physically violent, probably a bit verbally bolshy.
Yeah.
But just drinking until there was no shut off, you know.
Yeah.
I seemed to acquire energy through it as well,
Yeah.
which was unfortunate.
Any other drugs?
Occasionally, but not by design.
Right.
Just by poor judgment. And I remember Mark and Nigel, who had spent 3 years with me at college.
And they'd be getting hammered with you, but you were just getting doubly hammered.
But I thought everybody got hammered like me.
Yeah.
What I realise now is, okay, this is how people drink.
Yeah.
But they could see it at the time through, even if they were a few beers in, they could see that I was quite a few more beers than they were. And they pulled me aside in a thoughtful, sensitive way and said, look, we're concerned about you.
Okay.
And I guess that was a signal. And
was that out of the blue for you? Did you not expect
No, by
that?
the time they said that, I said, look, I understand that. And I like quite neat cut off points in my life. So in my head I thought, okay, well
there was another light bulb.
Yeah, and I thought, well, I'll use the New Year's thing when everybody's given up as my moment to just start a new thing. That would be my beachhead. The first month of January in 2006 would be a beachhead that hopefully I could get beyond by the end of that month and move into a new world. That was my plan. And so I set off on January 1st, 2006. No drinking, like many other people. And I wobbled on about the 23rd of January. I got hammered.
Right.
But then got back on it, thankfully. And then I haven't drunk since.
Really?
That's
Okay,
about 10
just
years.
one wobble. That's very good. Yes, and you didn't do any AA or any of that. You just sort of said bang. And that's rare that people can. But I can actually, because I know you quite well, I can see how your personality is.
It's all
again, it's you. By the way, it's maybe they said something, but then you go away.
Yeah.
You probably have a pint and get drunk and think about it and then go, right, that's it. I'm going to stop. And that's just
that was one of those ones
discipline.
where, well, I think there are other. You know, there's two ways of progressing through life, aren't there? You're either running away. You get somewhere by running away from where you come from.
Guilty.
Or you go somewhere because you're running towards something you aspire to.
Mm-hmm.
And there's obviously, life is made of a bit of both. I think when I talk about the earlier pieces, whether it's the getting an education inspired by that French girl, going further and going to university in the UK, getting the PhD scholarship, these are all things that I saw a glimmer and then I aspired to that and thought I'd like that in my life. By the time I got to the alcohol piece, that chapter, that crossroads, you know, I'd like to think it was I aspired to a life of sobriety.
Yeah.
I wanted to run away from
those
what
horrible
was a disaster.
nights.
What was disaster and getting into risky situations. I mean, it really does change your life. And I'll tell you what happened then when I gave up. You know, at that point I had become so insular that I didn't have a social circle. So I didn't have that risk of like, how do you explain to other people that you're not drinking in the bar? So I didn't go drinking in bars at that point, strangely. So I was able to kind of start again, and what was interesting is then you're so programmed, given our background, that Thursday, Friday, Saturday you go out. If you don't go out, you haven't had a weekend. So that becomes a reflex at that point. So when I would get to a Friday then, in the first 2 or 3 months, working in a top ad agency in London, everybody's going out, can't wait, drumming their fingers at 5 o'clock, want to go out to the local pubs in Covent Garden. And I'd slip out a little earlier than them, and I'd walk down to Leicester Square, and there was a Tower Records there.
Right.
And I'd be £50 guy, they used to call him. Like £50 guy was a guy with a bit of money, and he'd go in and he'd buy £50 worth of albums and DVDs and stuff. Right. And I'd go in and I'd spend 2 or 3 hours early on a Friday night, and I started to discover music again. It seems funny talking about CDs now, but that became my new ritual. I'd look forward to that. I'd go.
Do you think it was important to fill the hole with?
Yeah, you had to replace some kind of what was a reflex with another ritual.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, eventually I just sort of stayed off the social radar basically for effectively a year. And that was, again, another transformative chapter in my life where, for the first time in my life, I discovered a sense of calm and control. I'd walk around London sober. I would read, listen to music, see movies. I was all by myself. At that point, I was very much like off the matrix.
Were you lonely?
Yeah, I mean, what I wanted to leave behind as well was this sense of chaos, because alcohol brought chaos to my life and made my life chaotic. So I wasn't just giving up this liquid; I was giving up this chaos. And for that year in 2006, I had a sense of calm, a sense of control, a sense of things around. I was putting away a bit of money for the first time in my life. I was able to make clear-headed decisions.
Yeah.
I was as productive in work as I ever was. I was in control of things, and it was a wonderful feeling. And towards the end of that year of, here was my life starting to, I had enough distance then from 2005 to be able to say, I could do this, I could live like this is good actually.
Yeah.
And I had started to reform, build new habits. And towards the end of that year, I got a call. This is where HSBC comes back in. I got a call for a job in New York. They wanted me to come over and work in the HSBC business at J. Walter Thompson, New York, where you and I met. And that was 2006. And in November 2006, I left New York. I left London. At that point, I'd bought an apartment. Probably made the decision to buy the place when I was drunk or hungover, to be honest with you, the year before the Christmas. Come November 2006, after nearly a year of sobriety, I packed up everything. I cleared up the apartment. I let it out, pulled the door behind me, and a limousine from Virgin Atlantic came and picked me up and drove me to Heathrow.
They were the days.
Seriously, I couldn't. Again, like here I was,
first class over to
a year of distance between where I was and a lot of chaos, and I'm being flown business class to New York. Yeah. This lad from Tala. Dream come true for many people, and certainly a dream come true for me. So I'd never even been to America, never even been to New York.
Really?
What's not to love? So,
and at what point did that can walk into your life?
So this is where it, again, pivotal moment. So I take the job, and I met Ekin at some point in December 2006, and we would just bump into each other in the office. And
she was working there.
She was working there.
Right.
She popped her head up out of a cube one day, and I just looked at her and thought, wow. And then I thought about it.
Was it the first girl you'd met really since you gave up drinking?
Yeah. So I went to America. My mum and my aunt thought maybe meet a lovely girl. They had ambitions for me because I had in the sort of year of sobriety, I wanted nothing more than just to get my head straight.
Right.
I didn't want the complexity of a relationship because alcohol had fucked up a lot of relationships. But this is where serendipity has a way of stepping in, isn't it? So I meet Ekin, and she definitely made a real impression. I looked at her and thought, wow. But because in my head, my rational side is saying, well, I'm not interested in a relationship and I'm going to stay by myself. I didn't even contemplate a maneuver. And then at some point in January, Ekin, the Turkish girl who popped her head up out of the cubicle, she just arrived in an elevator one night when I was in the lift about to head down. She just put her hand in the door.
It's like sliding
just
doors.
opened. Yeah, she just came into the elevator, and we're stood there, just the two of us. And this is a typical New York ad agency, big glass skyscraper, and we're working our way down, and without even thinking about it. And this is something I could never do. No, not quite as dramatic. But I did turn to her and say, "Would you like to go for a coffee?" If I had ever thought of something like that, it sounds pathetic. But I met people before having had a few pints, and everybody's inhibitions are lowered, and it's just one big messy melange. And here I was in an elevator, and I just turned and asked her that, and she said yes, and we walked that night for 6 hours.
Really?
Yeah, we walked out of Lexington, 466 Lexington Avenue, where we worked, and we walked all the way downtown, and we walked through the West Village.
Did you get a coffee? Or were you stopping off in places?
We got a coffee, but we walked and talked. Yeah.
Right.
And we talked about a load of things that we just couldn't quite believe that we had the same interests.
Wow.
But obscure interests as well.
Did you go home with a spring in your step then that night?
Well, I thought, this is
a little bit tired after the 6 hours walking.
Well, I thought this is pretty amazing, but it sort of runs counter to my plan to be by myself. Here's this really amazing person. She's beautiful, and we would go and walk out together at night. nothing more than that. We would just walk and talk and drink, coffee and tea and all these different places around New York.
Yeah.
And then
like for a few weeks or something?
Yeah, for a few weeks.
Okay.
And very old school. And then eventually we got beyond the coffee.
Did you kiss under the bridge or something? Or
it was probably a moment like that.
Yeah. You're like the Italian guy in Brooklyn, the movie.
It's a little bit like that. It was a little bit like that.
Ekin is a art director, a digital art director.
She's a creative director at one of the top, I guess you'd call it a digital agency. Here. She makes apps, websites.
And she's
clients.
Turkish. And then I met them both when they were married, and they were still, he was at JWT. They decided, that's it, I've had enough, we're going off to set up something in Turkey. Tell me why you did that.
Yeah, that was one meeting too many, one bad meeting too many. So we meet and we fall in love. And
that's not one bad meeting with Ekin too many, that's one bad advertising meeting with.
After we have our sort of long courtship, we get together, we get beyond the coffee, and we fall in love, and we are the yin to each other's yang. That's us. We're connected, and we did 3 years together. We lived together on the Upper West Side in New York City, next to Central Park, both working in advertising. And then one day in 2009, I just texted her one day and said, "Should we get out of here?" And she said, "Yeah." And she called her mum, who's 7 hours ahead in Istanbul or in Bursa, and said, "Mama, we're going to come home." She said, "Oh, great, when?" "Probably in about 4 or 5 weeks." She said, "For how long?" "We're not sure. We're leaving the States and we're going to spend the summer with you." So we figured that was around May. We figured we could be with them by July, and then we would see the rest of the summer and maybe even the early autumn with her mum and dad in Turkey. And I still have photographs from that day. Pull the door in the apartment again, like that scene in New York, in London.
What was the reason, though? What was the reason? It was one meeting that broke the camel's back.
Well, for me, it felt like I've just described all these steps along the way, and it did feel like a marathon where you had really covered some distance and you really had accomplished something, but it was absolutely exhausting. Because bear in mind, there was trying to find my feet after my leaving cert. That was just the Irish chapter. Then it was leaving home, living in a foreign country, going to university, trying to figure out a world there, trying to start out as an adult, then trying to make a career starting out in advertising, and then through all of that, getting into a progressively darker place with alcohol, various relationships along the way. And by the time we reached that moment in May in 2009, I thought, wow, I'm really burnt out, really exhausted, and you could feel like walking up the steps in the subway each morning felt like you were carrying lead. Physically, I could feel the emotional exhaustion. And I also figured, I feel like I've enough now in the bank, because bear in mind, I had been doing the job a few years. I'd been working at some great places on some great clients, earning quite good money. I figured we could just step off for a little bit without fear.
But we were friends then, and you saw it the same in me, right? I mean, I used to be just a mess coming out every night. We'd be working ridiculous hours, but it was pretty toxic. I mean, it was just it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't friendly. It wasn't joyous.
It's how you would imagine advertising in New York City to be.
That's a good point.
A bit
cutthroat.
Yeah, a bit cutthroat. Always on, weekends, late nights, politics, backstabbing, and even if you weren't privy to the game, you knew it was going on. Your instinct could pick it up. Your antenna was twitching all the time. It was a very insecure sort of environment. And I think advertising, you're only as good as the last meeting you've had, the last idea you've had, and it's a perpetual sort of. You may be getting paid well, but it always feels a little like a house of cards. After you've been doing that for 10 years, it gets draining.
So, what was it like living in Turkey?
So we took the summer with Ekin's mum and dad, and it was blissful. And within 48 hours, all the worries of advertising and all that went away, and we just enjoyed this. Watching there's no line on the horizon between the sky and the sea, and it was absolutely blissful. And we had breakfast every morning with Ekin's mum, and her dad would come back and we'd have dinner, and it was just, that was life for a few months. And then a little bit like the summer passing back in the day after my leaving Cert, the summer passed, and then I found this reflex coming back on my part to, shit, what am I going to do?
Make something.
Yeah, I've got to do something. You know, I've got to work. Or Ekin and I started to do some really interesting projects with other people. Very unusual mix of projects.
Mm-hmm.
One was one of my friends from college. He had gone on and served in the army, and he had seen action in many places, and he'd made contacts in various parts of the world. And at the time when we were in Istanbul, the Somali pirate Gulf of Aden thing was happening.
Mm-hmm.
So 80% of the world's trade still goes by boat, and a good chunk of it goes around the Horn of Africa.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of lawless countries around there, and that was where you had a lot of piracy going on.
Yeah.
And a lot of these boats were legitimate targets, and being taken off course and brought into bays and having their contents unloaded, or the crews were held ransom. There was a real demand being created for security professionals to essentially escort these ships. And so some friends of mine set up one of these maritime security firms. But these were three guys who had come out of 10, 15 years of service and didn't have anything other than their laptops and experience.
Yeah.
We set them up with a strategy, a social presence, website, business cards, uniforms, logos, everything that they would need to start to at least.
So you had your own design company.
Yeah, we created a little studio. Ekin was the designer, I was the strategist. I could think it, she could make it, and we hustled our way through 2 years in Istanbul. And
so I then brought you back to New York. Why did you decide to come back? I mean, because it was tricky getting you back. But you've been in the same job for, you've obviously climbed the ladder, but you've been in the same company since you came back, which was 2012, right?
Yeah, and I think
11.
Yeah, we came back in 2011. We got to Turkey in 2009. We left in 2011, and that was very unusual. You think when you do 3 years in America, you think that that's your American chapter. You don't do it again. We figured after about 2 years, I thought, okay, well, we've got a choice. We need to stay here, but that didn't feel right. It felt like our experience in Istanbul was going to be a temporary one. Just enjoy it for what it was, and then get back onto the matrix. We had a profession. We were going to do that again, but we figured we'd go to London. Maybe Amsterdam, maybe Scandinavia. And then you got in touch, and the project just seemed too good to turn down.
Yeah.
So as I say, to make a U-turn and go back to the States was really unexpected on our part. But that's why if I was hesitant, it just ran counter to the plan I had in my mind. But then again, it's life is like a part strategy, part serendipity, isn't it?
Mm.
And you just have to at some point allow that sort of the intersection between the two to just sort of take hold. I suppose I became if I look back in the beginning and the direction, the rudderless sort of journey I took through school, I was a captive to serendipity. I just kind of just washed down the river.
Yeah.
And the thing that got my life, got some direction into it, was a sense of goal, and then the ability to create a strategy to kind of get myself somewhere, even if I couldn't see exactly what was beyond the mountain. I started to climb it. When you see the virtues of that, you can become a little rigid, I have to say. I became a little bit too strategic in the way, not just in my work, but in the way I sort of plan my life. I could probably get a little stressed if I didn't have enough control over it. Couldn't see what was ahead of the vehicle all the time. But now I've sort of seen the value of the other side too. So it's the serendipitous side.
So we had a crack at the project that Gordon spoke of. There was the two of us had a crack at relaunching globally the Gillette brand, which was kind of stuck in sort of 1982, and in our view needed to become a brand of more substance and meaning. Gordon did a huge amount of work on that. P&G in their wisdom decided not to go for it, and in my view they're still stuck back in maybe 1989 now. And it's sad when something like that, when you kind of know you have the answer or you're close to the answer, and the client doesn't see it the same way. What is your next light bulb before we finish? What is the next 7 to 10 years going to bring, or are you just going to flow?
When I talk about this sort of blend of a strategic outlook on life, where it's a series of setting objectives and a series of going after it, I'm a little lighter on that now, and I'm a bit more enjoying the serendipity of it.
Yeah.
I just have this life now that I've created with Ekin that is absolutely blissful. Look, we all have our own sort of emotional crosses we carry and so on, and there's still a bit of that. There's a reason why I drank like that, and there's still a bit of that I carry. But if I look at my life from the outside in, I'm incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
I mean, really, really very lucky. I've accomplished things that many people would just aspire to. I've seen a good chunk of the world, been to a lot of exotic places through work and through my own choice. I don't have to worry too much about money, but I've found my kindred spirit in Ekin. And I mean a true kindred spirit, like we...
Yeah, no, you're great together.
We are Velcro, she's the curly Velcro, I'm the spiky Velcro, and it works.
Gordon, that was great catching up. I found out a lot more about you that I didn't know, actually, and I wish you and Ekin all the best. You're great together. You were the first people who I was hoping to interview together, but I'm still a bit scared of my interview skills or lack thereof to spin those plates. So I'm definitely going to have Ekin on the show and get her side of the story. Maybe we'll run them back to back. But listen, great that everything's going so well in your career, and love having a chat. Thanks for being so open.
Thanks, man.